Mr. Ambassador, many years ago when you and your family left Romania, the idea, the prospect of a Romanian-US strategic partnership seemed utterly impossible. Today is a reality. However, it can be very easy for us to forget, how hard it was to get to this point. And especially for younger generation, I think there is a temptation to take this partnership for granted. For this reason, I would like for us to remind us what's in for the US and what's in for the Romanians in this partnership.
Dan, first of all, it's great to see you today.
Thank you.
Let me answer that in a sort of roundabout way, since you mentioned my childhood. As you know, I was born in Bucharest more than a few years ago. My family and I escaped communism when I was 9 years old. It was a horrific time, and I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to come back here a year ago as the U.S. ambassador appointed by President Trump. In the interim, the story has to begin after World War II, where the communist regime absolutely destroyed this country. In 1989, the revolution occurred, and many other countries prospered. Eastern Bloc countries prospered a lot more. The revolution in Romania, unfortunately, has not been completed. There is still a way to go, but there have been great advances made, and great advances are being made every day. I think Romania is a better country today. I think the advances that have been made this year in terms of economic development, military defense cooperation, and social issues, rule of law issues, have been tremendous. I credit the current government with doing that, and tremendous progress has been made. I would say that this year there has been more progress made since the revolution. We can discuss some of those issues in more detail if you want.
For sure.
But I want to reassure you and all of your viewers that Romania has no better friend than the United States and the people of the United States. And one of the great concerns for the United States is maintaining and sustaining the integrity, the border integrity, and social integrity of Romania, and supporting the people of Romania, elevating their standard of living, and making sure it continues as a very, very prosperous and independent country in the future.
Yeah. Well, there is also a way in Romania to say there is no such thing as free lunch, and people always, wondered what's in for the U.S. in this partnership. Why are they interested in Romania? Why are they interested in this partnership? And also what Romania could benefit out of it. And again, for a lot of people, the answers to these questions is probably very well known. But again, there are younger generations, I think, who don't quite understand this. They went into maturity at a point where the partnership was already a reality. So I felt that the need, to remind those who know the answer of these questions, and to let those who don't know the answers, again, what's in for the U.S. And also what's in for the Romania in this partnership.
I think there's a tremendous symbiotic relationship that exists today between Romania, the United States, the European Union, in NATO. Romania is a key player on the eastern flank of Europe. Along with Poland, they are the two linchpins to security of Europe. Romania is an oasis of freedom and great potential economic prosperity. There's increasing trade with the United States. It's a base for economic development in Europe, and the best ally the United States could have is a strong economic ally as well as a strong defense partner. I think we are seeing both of those things in Romania, and that is improving. Economically, this year we've commenced a number of very, very substantial projects. One is the Chernobyl nuclear reactor redevelopment. We are leading the refurbishment of one reactor and the building of two new reactors at Chernobyl. There will be Romanian content, French content, and Canadian content, and it's all being led by a U.S. company. Previous to that, there was a contract had there by a Chinese company called CGN, China General. Like most other Chinese companies that are active internationally, it was indicted for fraudulent and corrupt practices, and the Romanian government terminated their contract and agreement with them at Chernobyl earlier this year.
How hard it was to change, the partners, the companies involved in this contract, because at one point, for us, the journalists, it seemed like a done deal with the Chinese, and although there were a lot of comments in the media that, specifying exactly what you mentioned, all these question marks on this contract, still it seemed like a done deal. It was hard, to change that contract and get us into a partnership with our Western allies.
I think that the Orban government and President Iohannis were very supportive of this change. It's been a pleasure dealing with them this year. And also, nothing happened with a Chinese company there for several years. We were able to approach the Orban government and discuss a business-like plan to effectuate the refurbishment of one reactor and the building of two new ones in a fairly quick, for this type of work, process. We also recently signed a $7 billion financing package with the Export-Import Bank of the United States to help finance this work. Other participants in the project will also contribute equity and debt to finance the project. It's going to be a terrific project that's going to come online very, very quickly for this type of work. And when it's finished, it will provide approximately 40% of all of the electricity consumed by Romania, which is a tremendous number. As you may know, but some of our viewers may not know, Romania is currently the #2 oil and gas producer in Europe. I think when this project comes online, meaning Chernobyl, and also when the Black Sea oil and gas stations come online, Romania will become the #1 energy producer and exporter in Europe. It's a great place for Romania to be.
When do you estimate the Chernobyl project to be completed?
The refurbishment of the first unit probably within 3 or 4 years, and the other units within 2-3 years after that. It's a complex and sophisticated project, but all 3 reactors should be up and running within at most 10 years, probably approximately 7 or 8.
You mentioned a very important project, the Black Sea gas, which unfortunately after very good start, with the discovery of vast resources, unfortunately stalled. We know part of the reason. It is the Dragnev's government actions. It's meandering of changes in the law and decisions that were not well received by the investors. However, the gas is still there, and I was wondering how does it look from the perspective of the American companies involved in this project, the chances, to restart it. Are we going to see in the end a Romanian-American economic cooperation in this field, or it looked like it might suffer a reset and start again with, I don't know, other partners maybe?
I'm very bullish, as they say in America, on Black Sea oil and gas production. As we speak, there's a company called BSOG, which stands for Black Sea Oil and Gas, which actually already is working on putting in an underwater pipe to connect the offshore extraction platforms to the onshore facility. They anticipate being able to export the gas from the Black Sea to different areas in Romania and abroad, starting in the second half of 2021. The biggest field, the Neptune Deep field, has had slower progress, mostly...
Talking about the one Exxon is involved in.
That's correct. That's the one Exxon is involved in, mainly because of the adverse impact of the laws passed previously. We are hopeful that the Orban government and the parliament will address these laws and change them next year, so as to incentivize Exxon and its partners, including Romgas, in producing and extracting gas from these fields, which are very, very lucrative, and it would address a lot of the needs of not just Eastern Europe, but by doing so could alleviate the demands of Western Europe as well. For those of you who may not understand, Russian gas production is being used as a weapon to supply countries in Europe that they favor, to influence policies, or being cut off at its whim. The Russian gas company Gazprom is trying to use its availability of gas to facilitate Russian foreign policy, and European gas independence is one of the issues that the United States and its European allies have been working on very diligently over the last few years, so as to remove that pressure from the European states.
Yeah, in this respect, Poland was able to do important steps ahead. And in this context, I want to refer to some opinions of some, economical and political analysts from Romania who said that even the security, the military security of the Black Sea would be enhanced by having, U.S. investments in the offshore gas exploitation. Do you agree with this view?
Completely. As we look at the current situation, The United States and its European partners have opposed the completion of Nord Stream 2, which would allow Russia to pick who to deliver gas to and who not to deliver gas to. Similarly, the Russians are now trying to build Turk Stream 2 to have another avenue of gas delivery, and it is being used as a weapon. What we have to remember is that since the Russians invaded Crimea and the Ukraine, the Black Sea has been militarized to a very great degree by the Russians. What used to be the Russian fleet prior to the invasion of Crimea, they had a lot of old and rusted naval ships there. It is now a state-of-the-art fleet. They have very aggressive military exercises in the Black Sea, wherein they declare a lot of areas in the Black Sea off limits to commercial traffic. They try to control that and muscle other countries' commercial as well as military forces out of certain areas in the Black Sea. It's a situation that we will not tolerate or countenance, and it all comes back to being able to influence countries by the strategic use of energy resources. Having substantial gas produced by Romania will eliminate a lot of this pressure.
Because you touched this aspect of military challenges, of security challenges in the Black Sea, how would you assess the progress that Romania has made in terms of military preparing for its defense? We know for a long time that the defense of the Black Sea coast for Romania was a weak point. Definitely, we've made some important steps, by acquiring a lot of military equipment, extremely, important. But let's say on a scale between where we've been and where would be ideal to get, where we are now. Are we midway? Are we closer to the... How would you assess?
The defense cooperation between the United States, Romania, and NATO has never been better. I think the bilateral relationship between the United States and Romania, when it comes not just to military cooperation, but economic development and other issues, has also never been better. Enormous strides have been made this year. Aside from the defensive missiles at Deveselu, the Aegis missiles, we are in the process of modernizing Romania's armed forces, its military, its land forces, as well as its air forces and sea naval forces. The communications between the Romanian Ministry of Defense and the Department of Defense have never been better. We were able to establish this year regular weekly or bi-weekly communications between the two departments at a very, very high level. We were able to have Romanian service people serve with American service people. Again, they're involved with senior people in Europe so that there's great cooperation. And the modernization of Romania's equipment assures interoperability with NATO and U.S. materials. And I'm referring to F-16s, I'm referring to helicopters, I'm referring to drones, I'm referring to all kinds of equipment that is necessary to make sure that as allies we stand shoulder to shoulder with no issues between us. The United States, I've said it previously, will not tolerate any insecurity or any threats against Romania's border integrity.
Is there any landmark in terms of military procurement we should look forward to? We've seen the acquisition of the Patriot. We've I think it's already negotiated the HIMARS system. Is there any other important element that's on the pipeline?
In terms of weapon systems, I think there are a number of diverse weapon systems. I'm not going to discuss those today, but one of the points I want to make is that the Patriot system that's going to be delivered and installed in Romania is the same caliber that the United States uses and is the latest and highest technology. The same thing is true for the HIMARS system, and the same thing will be true for all of the other high-tech systems that will be deployed in Romania. Also, this year, we've continued to deploy American troops on a rotational basis to Romania. The number of rotational troops will increase as we move forward. And again, this is the United States' strong commitment to Romania's independence and border integrity. Romania, along with Poland, are the linchpins in Europe's defense on its eastern border.
So you're optimistic that in the foreseeable futures we will be able to unlock the no access strategy that Russia is working on in the Black Sea.
I think Black Sea security, Black Sea regional security is a very complex issue because, as you know, the Black Sea is surrounded by any number of states, not just on the western side with Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, Ukraine, but also on its eastern side. So the challenges to transportation, commercial, and as well as access to the Black Sea by other countries' military craft has to remain unimpeded, and we will assure that.
You announced, 1-2 months ago, about this project regarding a corridor between Gdansk in Poland and Constanța as part of the so-called Via Carpathia, part of the Three Seas initiative. And you came back later and added some more details. And you mentioned that there are actually joint teams working from the embassy, from the Romanian Ministry of Transportation, about deciding exactly the details of where it should, what would be the segments in Romania of this project. Are you able to tell us now more about the stage in which this project is?
This project, in my opinion, is one of the most crucial projects that Romania could undertake. The benefits to the Romanian economy of the Via Carpathia, which will run from Constanța to Gdansk, and also the accompanying railroad, which we refer to as Rail to the Sea, are crucial. As you, I am sure, know already, Constanța is the best deep-water port on the Black Sea. It has a limited capacity not because of the facilities in the port, but it has a limited capacity because of the infrastructure servicing the port. Enough container ships cannot get containers cannot get in and out of the port in order to increase the capacity of the port. This road and railroad will address those issues. It will allow a much quicker and better exit and entry to the port all the way to the Baltic Sea. This has been a dream for not just Romania, but also for Poland for quite a number of years. The benefits to the Romanian economy and to the Polish economy and to the economy of Eastern Europe will be absolutely remarkable. The road will not go through the Ukraine. The road will go from Constanța to Bucharest, up along Bulgaria, up next to Hungary, through Hungary, through Slovakia, I think, and into Poland. And that route will allow other cities to connect into this sort of commercial spine so that they develop. As you may know, I was recently in Iași. I saw the offices of Amazon. I saw the offices in the factory of a company called Borg Warner, which makes injection systems for automotive engines, truck and car engines. I was at the university, the agricultural university in Iași. Everybody says that Iași is an island. The reason it's an island is that it has inferior infrastructure. For an executive at a company in Iași to get to Brussels or to Luxembourg, it takes 3 flights. To drive is even worse. So what should be a 2 or 3 hour trip becomes a day trip. The city cannot grow, and one of the points made were that Iași is no longer competing with Cluj or Bucharest or Timișoara.
Because of this reason.
Iași is competing now with Madrid, Berlin, London, Paris, in order to sustain that competition. This type of infrastructure is desperately needed. Iași needs to be connected by a highway and a railroad to this type of north-south main highway and railroad in order to allow Iași to grow, which allows Romania to grow. Once these projects are undertaken, it will be a huge economic boon. And I think you've heard Prime Minister Orban announce, I think it was within the last several days, his support for a highway connecting Iași to this north-south highway. And I think there will be other similar projects underway. I've been meeting with Transportation Minister Bodie. We've discussed the paths of the highways. We've discussed financing. We've discussed a lot of other issues pertinent to this, which are very important. He has a working group. The embassy has a working group. And we're proceeding to try to finalize these plans and actually start work as soon as humanly possible.
When do you expect to finalize the plans, at least?
Oh, I think will be several months, unfortunately, but I think the plans need to be done correctly, otherwise disaster befalls.
Yeah.
So,
but far as I understand, the main backbone of Via Carpathia in Romania would still run mainly east to west. So going west from Constanța to Bucharest, and then east or northeast to a connection through Hungary. Would be an alternate route other than, let's say, the Bucharest-Sibiu projected highway that is being built right now as we speak, is going to be an alternate route to this, or is going to be using the Bucharest Pitești Sibiu corridor, far as you know at this point?
I think that's a very good question. That's one of the issues that we are looking at. Our working group is reviewing that with Transportation Minister Bodie's group, and what I'd like to say is yes to everything, because what is needed in Romania is not just one highway.
Yeah.
A number of highways.
As you mentioned, Iași, in order to connect Iași to Via Carpathia, there is another project.
Correct.
That needs, to be interconnected with Via Carpathia.
You are absolutely right. There are a number of, frankly, major infrastructure projects that have to be undertaken. Prime Minister Orban's government is committed to doing that. They're committed to undertaking more projects. They realize the crucial necessity and importance of these types of developments, which have been stalled for many, many years, or perhaps the ones that were not stalled were not even contemplated, to the development of Romania. I believe Romania has a huge, huge potential if it is allowed to grow in a free and democratic fashion. And what I mean by free is a free market way, where the government steps back and lets the free market proceed and grow. I think Romania can be one of the leaders in Europe in a very short time if it is allowed to do so.
Well, Romanians know also themselves that this country and them, they have a lot of potential. And as you mentioned, still they looked year after year after year how this potential was not fulfilled, and a lot of anger and frustration came out of this, but to no avail, because nothing changed. Of course, there are two important components. One is the planning, the execution of the project, and second is the financing. When you approach this we started to discuss about this subject of Via Carpathia and the railway link, where you already knew that there's going to be some interest, or there are some interest from American banks or other institutions, financial institutions, to finance these projects, or it's something that it should be started as a component of the project after you establish the routes. So to be even more direct, how big are the chances that these projects might be financed by American institutions?
I think there's a very high likelihood it's going to be financed. The chairwoman of ExIm Bank will be here next week. We will be meeting, and this is one of the projects we will be discussing. As I mentioned earlier, ExIm Bank committed
for Cernavodă already. Yeah.
For Cernavodă up to $7 billion in financing. This will be one of the projects we are discussing with regard to Romania's economic development. But the real answer to your question is not so much the financing piece, but when you look at why the projects were not done in the past, you need to look at what's been happening in this country for the last 7, 8 years, 9 years, and especially the last 2 or 3 years, 19, 18, 17, the fraud, the corruption, the lack of transparency has to end. There has to be accountability, and there has to be transparency, and the rule of law is paramount. None of these things can happen unless we adhere to the rule of law. And the rule of law has to be fair and equal for everybody. You need an independent judiciary. you need full access to the judiciary in order to get investments, in order to get financings, in order to get any of the other things that are so desperately needed here. People need to understand that the endemic corruption of the past is going to end. Unless that ends and we have rule of law and transparency, none of these things will be completed in a successful manner. The corruption of the past has to end. Mr. Dragna is in jail. There are others that worked with him, that helped him. I referred to the Red Barons, but there are others that, as President Johannes says, the revolution was not completed. The revolution has to be complete. The rule of law has to prevail in Romania for Romania to achieve its rightful place in Europe.
This next coming Sunday we'll have general elections in Romania, and it's a good moment to reflect a little bit of what happened in the past electoral cycle. For the first 3 years, we know very well already, the amount of damage that was done to, to the institutions, important institutions of justice and of the, that have to ensure the rule of law. How do you feel about the progress that is being made in the last year, since, as you mentioned, Dragna was put in jail?
I am very optimistic. I think we've made a tremendous amount of progress. I think Interior Minister Vella, I think Justice Minister Predoiu have worked very hard to achieve that. I think based on my discussions and meetings with the Justice Minister shortly after my arrival here, it took him several months to refill positions in the Justice Department that were decimated by the prior government. We could not have meetings with him because he didn't have the staff to do it. Similarly, I know the Interior Minister Vella went through the same thing. I think recently, as you have seen a couple of weeks ago, the Interior Minister had raids against organized crime, human traffickers and others in 8 or 10 cities around Romania. 600-700 people were arrested, and they're continuing. He called it Z-Day, referring to zero tolerance. Perhaps he was referring to me for Zuckerman, I don't know. But we announced a plan to combat human trafficking, which is a terrific scourge. It's a disgrace to this country. There is no place for it in Romania, and it has to end. I think the Interior Minister and the Justice Minister have put up a program. We are continuing to work with them diligently. Many arrests have been made, and many more have to be made to get rid of the clans, organized crime, and human traffickers in Romania. I think they're very, very serious. I think they've accepted a plan suggested by the State Department with regard to eliminating and combating human trafficking. They are working together with our law enforcement groups very closely, and we've made tremendous progress in those areas. The law enforcement collaboration has been absolutely superb. I also committed to Prime Minister Orban, as well as Minister Vella and Predoiu, that we will make available all law enforcement assets of the United States to help Romania fight not just human trafficking, but organized crime in this country.
combating human trafficking was one of the most important topics you've touched in almost all of your public appearances. And honestly, I started to look more on this topic after seeing you, how much you have insisted. And that's when I discovered, the fact that we are in a terrible position in the report that the State Department is releasing every year in this regard. Actually, now we are in Tier 2 watch list for the second year. So unless this progress that you mentioned is going to be considered sufficient by the State Department, there is a risk for Romania to slip into Tier 3. And I discovered with great surprise that actually, if such a thing would happen, would have an impact also in on the financing of different common projects that you mentioned before. Maybe you would like to elaborate a little bit, because still a lot of people in Romania don't understand the seriousness of this issue that Romania is not doing enough to address.
If Romania slips into Tier 3, it will affect all financing, lending, and other similar programs that the United States assists Romania with. It's a congressional law, and it's meant to be a deterrent to human trafficking, which should not exist. It's a disgrace and a scourge, and I feel very strongly about that. And it should certainly not exist in a civilized country like Romania. The good news here is that we have had many, many meetings with Minister Vela, Justice Minister Rădoiu, and others, and we have accepted the plan proposed by the State Department to address human trafficking that should be implemented. I brought a copy with me. I can read to you that Romania needs to undertake to elevate itself from the Tier 2 watch list to Tier 1, where Romania should be.
Is the plan that it's also mentioned in the report, or it's something?
Yes, it's mentioned in the report, and there are suggestions as to what Romania should do.
There are quite a lot of suggestions. The list is pretty long.
But the two main themes, again, there are a lot of specific suggestions, but the two main themes are the rule of law, expedited trials, independent judiciary, arresting and trying the perpetrators, and also assistance to the victims, which I have not mentioned, and we have been focusing on that. And I'm happy to say that we've been working on a plan, which I alluded to a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago, when the new mayor of Bucharest visited me at the embassy, and I want to disclose now, which we will make public shortly in another week or so, to provide for housing and shelters in Bucharest for trafficking victims. And we've been working with Prefericitul Daniel, and we've been working with Ana Tipe, and we've been working with the city of Bucharest, which has also started its own anti-trafficking task force. So this is a very serious issue, and organized crime and human trafficking has no place in Romania.
So to make even more clearer, if this progress, it's not going to consider enough. Even the financing of the Cernavodă plant would be in jeopardy. Am I right?
In theory, you're correct. I am hopeful and I trust in the goodwill of people like Prime Minister Orban, President Iohannis, Minister Vella, Minister Predoiu, in implementing and proceeding with these plans. I don't see why they would not, and it's an effort that should be undertaken by all.
One of the elements that's on this report, the human trafficking report, it mentions another issue that hasn't been addressed properly. It is the corruption, implicit or explicit, between the organized crime and people who should go after them. Who should either, indict them, judge them. People who are committing these crimes, they find protections within the ranks of the central administration of Ministry of Internal Affairs or among prosecutors and judges. Of course, our efforts would be in vain. What were the answers of those responsible when you touched this topic?
I think it's an unfortunate situation. I think, to answer your question in context, we again have to go back 30 years or 31 years almost now to the revolution when the communists were gone. The communist government absolutely eviscerated and destroyed this country for generations. And unfortunately, a lot of the remnants of that still exist. A lot of progress has been made, but not sufficient. And I think a lot of the remnants exist in various parties. And I think that as Romania moves forward, any corrupt individuals have to be removed from any position of authority, and they have to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, which again comes back to the issue of an independent judiciary and the rule of law, which was disregarded and under the Dragnaz regime of the prior government, the rule of law and many laws, criminal laws, were weakened, some removed, and that cannot stand. And many are trying to reinstate the prior laws so that the rule of law can be enforced, and people that are corrupt can be fully prosecuted.
The fight against corruption was for many years a topic, a subject of the cooperation between the U.S. And the Romanian authorities, and also you mentioned a roadmap between Department of Justice in the U.S. and Ministry of Justice in Romania. What's the status on that roadmap and on the objectives it looked to reach? How far and how well we are into this process?
Well, the group in the U.S. dealing with this from state is a group called JTA, and in the human rights, not in the human rights, in the anti-trafficking report, it was set forth. The Minister of Justice accepted the recommendations, and they are being fully implemented. I think the statistics for arrests and prosecutions this year as compared to last year are increasing dramatically, which I frankly think is remarkable, because we have not yet discussed the elephant in the room, which is COVID. So given the background of COVID, to see all of the positive steps taken by the Justice Minister and the Interior Minister to enforce and follow this roadmap so far is remarkable.
You mentioned earlier that in order to get access to financing and to be able finally to build the projects that Romania so desperately need, the fight against corruption, you know, it's crucial. One of the main arguments that were given to all the journalists when we were asking what needs to happen in Romania to have more US investments. Are we at the point where actually we've done enough to be able to see an acceleration of the US investments in Romania, or it's still work in progress and that turning point hasn't come yet?
I'm not sure what doing enough really means. I think this year, in terms of economic projects, if you look not just at the defense-related military-type projects, which are very, very substantial, but you look at projects like Chernivtsi, you look at projects like the Constanța to Gdansk Highway and Railroad, and there are other projects that are also being contemplated. It's been huge. I know infrastructure construction has been one of Transportation Minister Bodie's primary goal. They're working on a variety of projects. But in terms of getting more U.S. investors here, it's a process. I am very much involved with the American Chamber of Commerce here, which is a terrific group. And there are a lot of American companies here already. For example, Coca-Cola is here, Pepsi-Cola is here, a variety of advisory companies and accounting companies like PwC. You have pharmaceutical companies here. You have a lot of technology companies here. And speaking of technology, Cluj and Bucharest, especially Cluj, is a destination point for Europeans to come to Romania to work in the technology sector. Aside from that sector in Cluj and in Bucharest as well, a lot of people, Romanian people, are leaving Romania because not so much that they can't find a job or the standard of living, but they lost hope that tomorrow will be better for them and their families. I think that once these programs that we have been discussing are allowed to ripen and progress, I am very hopeful that the people who are leaving, who are the people that this country, Romania, needs the most, will come back, because those are not just the educated and the professionals, but also the entrepreneurs, the people that have the courage to seek a better life for themselves and their families in other places of Western Europe, the US, and other countries. So I am hopeful that once we allow a free market Romania to take hold, and that can only happen if we have the rule of law and an independent judiciary, which I think every ambassador to this country for the last 20, 30 years has been saying, we cannot achieve that. and
Yeah.
that's crucially important. So there are a lot of companies here. They need to expand. I mentioned earlier the Amazon model, which is a true story in Yash. They want to do more. They are hampered. They cannot do more because people don't want to come there because of the limitations on infrastructure and travel as a result of that. Same thing with Borg Warner, same thing with a lot of other companies in a lot of different cities.
So, to understand exactly, you say if Romania continues on this path, of consolidating the rule of law, repairing the damages that were done to the justice institutions, we can expect to see American banks or American financial institutions financing big projects like highways, like railway, and see American companies coming to Romania to build and to work in this project. This is something that's certain. We can say.
Nothing in the world is certain, but let me give you two more examples. Yeah. One, when this government took over last November from the prior government, I was advised by the finance minister, Kitso, that the prior government was keeping 2 sets of books. They had not paid bills for over a year. And these were bills for everyday services rendered to the government. Yeah. Who knows what else they were doing? Who knows what the monies were being used for? In the same vein, the former mayor of Bucharest had created 21 or 23 companies that over the last 2, 3, 4 years, there were, I believe, 2 court orders to stop these companies, that they were created illegally and they should be put out of business. That did not happen. These companies still continue. On top of that, and in the same vein, there are over 1,200 wholly owned state and municipal companies in Romania. Another several hundred, 300, 400, 500 companies that are partially owned by the state and municipalities. And the PSD government passed a legislation which, because they control parliament, against privatizing. If you don't privatize these companies, you stymie competition, you do not have a free market, nobody can compete with them. Who's going to compete with a government? You can't. They will undercut price, they will scare the opposition, you cannot compete. Also, aside from limiting the efficiency of the markets and creating competition, they are also a repository for political patronage. They encourage corruption, and they will keep bad habits continuing. If you have a public company, they are subject to the rule of law, they are subject to transparency, they are subject to innovation, creativity, they will build bigger, they will have good plans, and they will improve Romania. So this is one of the issues that has to be addressed. And again, this comes back to the rule of law and transparency. We cannot keep feeding corruption and political patronage in this country. It will not achieve its highest potential if that goes on.
I can't stop to ask, although I know that you've been here for only a little bit over a year. So
a little less than a year. I think it'll be a year in the middle of December. Another 2 weeks will be a year.
Less than a year, sorry. But the embassy was here even in the 3 years of this electoral cycle. And I'm curious if you reported, what were the answers of the former government officials when they were asked by members of the U.S. Embassy about these things? Why don't you do more in the fight against corruption? Why do you change the laws on justice in the benefit of the corrupt people, and all the essential questions. What answers did the U.S. officials got from the official of the previous government?
Well, some were non-answers, some were promises to address issues, and the promises were never fulfilled. Some were just nasty answers to mind your own business. I think what I am saying today is really nothing new. I think every American ambassador for the last 20, 30 years has been saying the same thing. We look at issues to advance democracy, to advance human rights, where we think our allies should be. As an example, a free market economy, as we have in the United States, has created more wealth around the world than any other economic system ever. It has lifted people out of poverty. It has enriched countries and individuals and people as a whole, and eliminated issues of corruption. Again, I don't mean to pound the rule of law and transparency, but it needs to be implemented across the board here without exception.
Still, as we've seen over and over again, although for us journalists, things are clear. A lot of Romanians are still voting politicians and parties that do not obey these essential principles and values. And considering again that in a few days we'll have general elections, what would you tell them? What would you tell these people who, for some reason, continue to vote people who don't act in their interest?
We don't pick winners and losers in the elections in any country, especially in Romania. We speak out for issues that are important to the United States. Since the first day I arrived here, I spoke out on the very issues that we discussed earlier. I think we believe in people's right to self-determination and to do what is in their best interest. We hope that people pursue the democratic process and achieve and seek and achieve a better Romania for themselves and for their children. I think this is a moment of great hope and expectation, and I think since I've been here, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think a tremendous amount has been achieved. So I am hopeful that that trend will continue into the future.
Well, we've been it's been a tough year. COVID really changed a lot of things all over the world, and I wanted to ask you, how went the cooperation between Romania and the US in combating COVID so far, and maybe what are some elements for the future in this cooperation?
Well, at the beginning, and unfortunately, the beginning was too long ago of this scourge. And we talk, and before I address that, we all talk about COVID and what Romania should do and what the US should do or what another country should do. But we never talk about the source of COVID. China was the source of COVID. China is the problem here. Everybody seems to forget that, and we can talk about China in other contexts. But this whole problem goes back to China. China has created a problem that has turned the world economies upside down. It has turned people within countries against themselves with respect to what may be or not be the best solution to keep their people safe, and has turned countries against each other, closing their borders in the attempt to keep their people safe. And we all discuss what the best remedy should be, but we always forget that COVID came from China, it came from Wuhan, it probably came from a lab in Wuhan. So we need to keep that in context. Number two, there was great support between Romania and the US in the early days of COVID, as there is now. The US helped financially. American companies in Romania gave millions in cash and other contributions to the Romanian people. The American government gave various cash equivalents, as well as various personal protective equipment to Romania, and assisted the Romanian people in other respects. The Romanian people, in a gesture of great, for me, it was just a tremendously generous gesture, sent doctors and professionals to the United States to help people there with COVID, to share the experiences they learned here in the United States. And currently, everybody's working on a vaccine. From what I understand, there are several vaccines that are ready, and I think they're in the process of being distributed. My understanding is that the first batch of vaccines will be distributed within weeks, and hopefully people will start being vaccinated against COVID in the next few weeks, which will hopefully will be the beginning of the end of this terrible problem.
Are you going to personally going to get vaccinated if the vaccine is it going to be available?
I've been advised that we will probably get a vaccine at the embassy at some point in January, they're anticipating, and I will absolutely get a vaccine.
Well, talking about this, it's a major issue. This for this whole year, there's been this underlying effort from various foreign powers, in first of all denying the COVID, then talking about the uselessness of a vaccine. How would you appreciate our effort to combat these propaganda efforts, who actually are continuing a tremendous propaganda effort that has been taking place in order to subvert the military cooperation, the NATO alliance, the trust in state institution, in democratic processes?
It's a terrible problem. I think you have your typical list of malign players: Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, that issue stories about COVID. They try to foment distrust, instability, and generate lies. COVID is a problem. Thank God it is not responsible for more deaths than it's already responsible for. Most of the people infected with COVID recover fully, but unfortunately many have lost their lives, and it's just a terrible tragedy, and my heart goes out to the families of all those people who lost their lives to COVID. It's just a tragedy, and it's unfortunate that so many of these malign players use this as a destabilizing force to attack democracies in the West.
Well, we are most probably heading towards a change at the White House, and I was wondering how this going to be, how this going to affect your job here in Romania. Are you going to be still be the U.S. ambassador in Bucharest for a while?
Well, you said we're heading for a change, but there's no finality yet. I think one of the wonderful things about the American process is the peaceful transition of power. There are still questions that have been raised with regard to various issues in the election process. I am sure those will be resolved one way or another in the near future, and we will have a president inaugurated on January 20th. All diplomats, all ambassadors submit their resignations, which are either accepted or rejected by the administration that is sworn in on January 20th. Until somebody tells me otherwise, I am still the ambassador here, and I look forward to continuing as such.
An ambassador really involved in what's going on in Romania and in the well-being of our partnership. And considering that we have this conversation just one day of our celebration of the National Day, I would like you to invite, if you have a message for the Romanian people who you would maybe want to address it in Romanian, a language that you speak very well. I invite you to do so.
Thank you, that's very nice. Felicitări la 102 ani de la Marea Uniune. În opinia mea, România a făcut progrese imense anul ăsta și sper să continue aceste avansuri pentru mulți ani și să-și ia locul care ar trebui să-l ia în fruntea Uniunii Europene. Mulțumesc.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you today, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you.